Welcome to Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer, a show to make your survivorship an easier journey by providing information and advocating for you. A show to help practitioners and their level of performance. This is the CROC Podcast. Here is your host, Dr. E. And alongside him to share some hope and inspiration from the Have Faith, Let It Begin podcast, co-host Angel Santana.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the CROC Podcast. Listen to me, guys. If you wanted to spend the next 30 minutes of your life listening to how great and perfect things are in the world of cancer survivorship, this podcast is not for you. But if you want to know the truth, if you want to know the flaws, if you want to know the flops of a broken system and how to fix it, and what you guys need to do to survive your survivorship, then you have come to the right place. My name is Dr. Tommy Anelli, and today I'll be addressing a very difficult, a very challenging, and a very neglected topic. Today, we're going to be talking about how to confront a colleague who is not doing the right thing for your patient. Joining me as always, my co-host and dear friend, Angel Santana. Angel, happy weekend.
Happy weekend to you, as I've got music in the background playing because people think that I'm off today, but that's okay. It's just the Have Faith, Let It Begin soundtrack because my ringtone is going off. But listen, I am feeling amazing. We have come off a great holiday week, you and I. I want to ask you a quick question because you always ask me how I'm doing. How are you doing, my friend? Because I'm just elated to be here today.
I am elated too, and I'm really excited about this topic, and it's a tough topic, but I'm up to the challenge. I'm feeling well, and I'm just, every moment that I get to serve our cancer survivors is such a humbling experience and such an honor. And you know, I have to say, just as a segue to this episode, we all know that there's moments in medicine that are difficult. There are moments in medicine that not just test our knowledge, they don't just test our skill, but they test our character, and they test our willingness to step forward, to do the difficult thing, to do the right thing, and to stand up for our patients, no matter what the consequences are. So I guess the question that I start with is, what would you do if your patient was suffering, not because medicine has failed them, but because their doctor just has disappeared? They're not rounding on them in the hospital. They're not leading the care, and they're just not showing up. And your patient is looking to you for help. So all of our podcasts are based in real life. They're based on true stories. And although I do change the name, they are true, and this happened over the last 2 months. So today we're going to talk about the story of Robert. So Robert presented to us maybe about 6 months ago, right from the start, with stage 4 metastatic lung cancer. So his cancer, in essence, not only was in the lung, but was in some of his other organs. It was in his liver. It was in his bone. And to say the least, he and his family were very overwhelmed. But they weren't just overwhelmed with his diagnosis. They were also overwhelmed with the information. They had very limited medical knowledge. They had some restrictions in their competence, but they were wonderful people. They are wonderful people. And I helped them through the process of the initial consultation. And there was some good news that actually started with his case, because we've been starting to discuss on this podcast the new generation of medical therapeutics, a new series of drugs that are meant to not just be a bazooka or a tank or a grenade. They're supposed to be very sophisticated types of therapeutics. These are very, very targeted agents that go after cancer mutations and vulnerabilities. And he had one of these mutations. And he did great in the beginning. His cancer melted away. He had a great initial response, and he did well until he didn't, until the disease began to progress. And he got admitted to the hospital with back pain. And X-rays and imaging and MRIs showed that the cancer was starting to push into his spinal cord, which is an oncologic emergency and is a potential risk for paralysis. So I was asked to do a consultation, which I was happy to do, but the request didn't come from the oncologist. The request came from the hospitalist. And something didn't feel right. Didn't feel right from the beginning. Something felt very off to me. So there was no direction that the case was going. There were no notes. There was no presence from the oncologist. And the hospitalist and the hospital team did their best to try to take care of this guy. But the care that was required was very sophisticated and above their heads. And it became very fragmented and it became very reactive instead of being proactive. So I stepped in, and of course, the first thing that goes on is the family just attacks you. You know, they start with the questions. Hey, doc, what's the plan? Hey, doc, have you seen my oncologist? And I had to pause because I was really speechless. I didn't really know what to say. I had no answer to them. So I sat down with them, and the family leaned in, and they said, Doc, we just want to know what to do. So they didn't really want to know statistics. They didn't really need any survival curves. They didn't need any fancy talk. It was just, hey, doc, what should we do? And in that moment, I realized something very heavy. I realized that I could help, but I wasn't the one they needed. What they needed was their oncologist. And the questions kept coming and they kept turning to me every day, every decision that was made, every moment of uncertainty. They came and they asked me what to do. And I started feeling very frustrated. I began to feel very abandoned. I tried to do everything I could. I coordinated the care. I tried to act as the broker between the hospitalist, the internist, the specialist, the nephrologist, the neurologist, the neurosurgeons, just to make sure that Robert got treated correctly, because there was a lot at stake. It was a high risk case. He had the threat of being paralyzed from his cancer. And I realized that there was a limit to what I could do, because what they needed wasn't just me, wasn't just a doctor. What they needed was their oncologist. They needed a person, the person who knew their story. They needed the person who owned the overall trajectory of his care. And they needed a doctor who could say, this is where we are and this is where we're going. But with that absence, I could feel that tension. I could feel that tension every time I went in the room, every time I spoke with the patient, every time I spoke with his family, because I wasn't just observing a gap in care. I was absorbing that gap. I became the default leader of his case. I became the stand-in. I became the emotional anchor, but I didn't have the full authority for that role. I didn't have the full picture, and ethically, I knew that I couldn't completely take over the case. So what to do? I sat down with them, the family leaned in, and to be honest with you, I had to make a decision. Even before I confronted the oncologist, I had to make sure that the patient was stabilized. So at first, the first thing I did was I had to be a stabilizer. I had to make sure that the patient, Robert, was not suffering and he wasn't in danger. I had to become a translator. I had to help them understand what was happening, even when everything was unclear and their doctor was a no-show. I had to act as an advocate. I had to push. I had to be respectful, but I had to be firm. I needed to get the medical oncologist to re-engage, and I couldn't be passive. I couldn't just hope that they were going to show up. I had to actively close that gap. And the way I did it was, the first thing I did was I needed to find out if there was something I wasn't seeing. I had to find out if there was a secondary agenda or if there was a problem with the oncologist that I didn't know about. I had to find out, because sometimes there's context that we don't know at first. So rather than blame, or cast dispersions, I had to find out. So in this case, there was no secondary issue. There was really no excuse. The next thing I had to do was I had to approach the oncologist and using the patient as the anchor. It was not personal. It was not a personal thing between two doctors. It was about the patient. It wasn't about the doctors. It was about the patient. And we talk about this all the time on this podcast, Angel. We talk about that secret society of healers, right? We've talked about doctors always standing up for other doctors. And that is seeped in history, right? So there's a connectivity between us because of the rigors of our training. I mean, we're really trained like, ridiculous training. Actually inhumane training, but that bonds us. There's a connectivity of life and death. At times we have that power. Our skills sometimes determine life, and sometimes our skills can actually basically stave off death and maybe even steal life right from the jaws of death. And then there's the connectivity, because what we deal in every day isn't about stocks or isn't about bonds and isn't about, heaters or isn't about, carburetors. It's about human frailty, and all of that connects us. And things are better. This good old boy thing, this whole secret society of healers and sticking together, it's really not that way anymore. But I still think we give each other too much of a benefit of the doubt. In this case, certainly, hey, maybe there's a problem, or maybe, hey, let me just kind of pick up the gap or, close that gap. But it's not that you're calling out a colleague. It's that you're just calling up the standard by anchoring to the patient. And then finally, the defining of a role, right? So I told myself, I'm not going to let this patient suffer. I'm going to protect my patient, but I am a consultant. I am not the captain of the ship. And I know this drives the entire CROC board crazy when I go off on tangents, but I think it's important that I go off on a tangent here, a little detour. So it amazes me almost on a daily basis about how little our survivors know about their chain of command. I don't think many of them really know who's in charge of their care. And it shocks me. And I think we need to take a minute to just kind of clarify that. And I'll use my famous sports analogies to do that. So if you happen to have a football team that you love, then as extraordinarily vocal fans, we know who to blame when our teams don't win the Super Bowl. First person you blame is the owner. The second person you blame is the head coach. And then, so the head coach accounts to the owner. To the head coach is the offensive coach, the defensive coach, and the special teams coach. And each of those coaches have a bunch of people who then report to them. In offense, they have the line coach, they have the running back coach, the receiving coach, the quarterback coach. Defensive coaches have the linebacker coach, the lineman coach, secondary coaches, and so on and so forth. Our patients need to make a chart of who's taking care of them. They need to make a chart of who is the owner, who has ownership of their care. Again, I'm using the word shock 3 times, but it's shocking that our survivors don't know who they're placing in whose hands they're placing their life. And you have to have emergency contact numbers on this chart. You have to know how to contact these people. You have to know who they are and where they work and where they are located. And you have to know this like you know your own name. And then little kudos or hats off to Denise. I was talking about the podcast today, and she made another recommendation. When you're in the hospital, so many doctors come in and out of your room. I don't want to say hundreds, but pretty damn close. You need a notebook. When a doctor comes into your room, whether they're an intern, a resident, a consultant, a hospitalist, a nephrologist, a pulmonologist, a neurosurgeon, the first question you're going to ask is, hello, doctor. Can you please tell me your name? Can you please tell me what it is you're here to do? What's your specialty and why you're here to see me? And you need to write that in your notebook. So getting back now to the whole process of defining your role. Sorry about that detour, but it's really important. Our survivors need to know this stuff. So lastly, my interaction, how to interact with your colleague. So this is where people hesitate, they get uncomfortable, they feel shameful, they don't want to shame their colleague, they don't want to lose referrals, right? So this is the person who feeds me, this person gives me cases, this is the patient who puts food on my table, right? So am I supposed to be nice to them because they put food on my table? Or do I need to basically shake shit up because they're just not showing up? And this is where you cannot be passive. You can't just hope that oncologist just shows up. You have to close that loop. So here's what I did. I called, nothing. I texted, nothing. So finally, I got the doctor on the phone and I had to basically read them the riot act. You need to see this patient now, but I'm not here. I can't see the patient. Well, you know what? You better figure it out. You better get one of your colleagues, one of the covering doctors, the doctor on call in your practice. You better get them over here to see this patient by 5 o'clock. If there is not a note on this chart by 5 o'clock, and I'm going to set my Apple alarm at 5 o'clock, if I don't see one of your oncologists on this case, heads are going to roll. It was like one of those, or else, I am not playing games anymore. This is what's got to be done. And thankfully, it got done. So I circled back to the patient, which is really important. I can see how frustrating this is for you guys, and you have every right to feel this way. But right now, my role is to make sure you're comfortable, to make sure you're safe, to make sure your symptoms are managed, and we keep moving things forward. Your primary oncologist is the key to your care, and I got their attention, and they will be in to see you before 5 o'clock. And in the meantime, until you see them, if you need anything, here's my cell phone. Call me anytime. So what this did, Angel, was this validated them. This reassured them. I didn't lie to them, and I didn't even have to throw anybody under the bus, even though they probably deserve to. But what I did was I acknowledged reality, and I clarified the responsibilities. So I'm going to leave you with this. Robert got his surgery so he would not become paralyzed. Robert got his radiation. Robert and his family finally got clarity. They got the oncologist involved, and they got the information that they needed to their level of understanding. They got to review the entire case. I reviewed all their films. We established a timeline with his cancer, and that gave them a sense of peace. And it was a peace that was grounded in knowing that all of the pain and all of the suffering that Robert went through was not because they were abandoned but by their oncologist, but because at the end of the day, Robert had an aggressive and nefarious disease. He had a cancer that, although was initially amenable to treatment, became unrelenting and untreatable. And after a final family meeting, which I agreed to lead because I had such a good rapport with them and they trusted me, many tears, Angel, were shed because it became very clear that hospice was going to be the best choice for him. And I'd like to think, to end this podcast, that some of those tears were tears of thanks for someone that would stand up for them and not stand up for their colleagues. So in closing, in oncology, we talk about teamwork. We talk about multidisciplinary care. We talk about shared responsibility. But shared responsibility can only work when everyone shows up. And when someone doesn't show up, the system does not pause. The patient does not wait. The cancer does not fall asleep, but the burden does shift. And in this case, it shifted to me. It shifted to someone, anyone who was willing to carry it. And sometimes, and this is to my colleagues, that someone is going to be you, because I know it's not our job, but it is our duty. Because at the end of the day, patients don't care about roles. They don't care about ownership. They care about one thing. They care about the question, is someone here for me? And let's make sure that answer is always yes. Angel, please wrap it up.
Well, I'm going to speak to this from the patient's point of view. As a patient myself, I want to say something directly to every doctor listening. We need you. Not just your knowledge, not just your diagnosis. We need you. Your presence, your attention, your willingness to stay with us in that moment when we're scared, when we don't understand what's happening, when everything feels uncertain. We're not just looking for answers. We're looking for someone who won't walk away. Dr. E reminded that of us and reminded what he did and what doctors should do. And that's what it looks like. Stepping in, staying present, not leaving the patient alone in their time of need. That matters that will always matter more than you'll ever realize. Because in those moments, your presence brings comfort, trust, and even hope. So from a patient's point of view, thank you to the doctors who stay, and to those still learning. We need you there with us when we need you the most.
Well, I told everybody that today wasn't going to be a comfortable podcast, and if you wanted to hear all about organ music and sweet sweet candies, this was not your podcast. It's important for us to point out our frailties and our faults and our foibles, and how sometimes we do not do the right things for our survivors. And quite frankly, the greatest gift that we're given as healers, as doctors, is that opportunity to serve our patients in an oncologist world, that is to serve our survivors. So I will end with our CROC blessing by wishing everyone out there, on behalf of Angel, myself, the board of directors here at Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer, a very long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. God bless you. God be with you. Peace. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Hey, CROC Nation, if today's message inspired you, please subscribe, download, and share this episode with your friends or someone who you believe needs it. Visit us at crocvip.com to connect, learn, and join the fight. Let's spread hope, one story at a time. Until next time, remember, we are not just a podcast, we are a movement.